Hello, welcome back to the Life of Chai Gardening Edition. Al Toth here in the North Central Washington. Today we're going to be talking about weeds and a strategy to control them. Now, the first thing about weeds is that a lot of times they're non-native. They outcompete the native species. They don't have any predators, so they can push out native and, of course, in your cultivated garden. So the way we deal with weeds is, again, coming up with a strategy. And these ideas, not just the physical tools, are going to be a toolbox. The idea of a strategy is first of all, you need to understand the life cycle of the weed. You have to know what weeds you have. So you may have 2 or 3, maybe 4 or 5. By understanding the life cycle, you'll be able to pick the worst weed. And one instance I had was oxalis. It was a commercial maintenance account, and all the beds were loaded with oxalis, along with 2 or 3 other types of weeds. But the oxalis, by the way it spreads, some spread by air-blown seeds, the oxalis by exploding seed pods, some by underground roots and rhizomes. So you have to know, and you have to get it before it goes to seed, because one gardening phrase is that for every year that plant goes to seed, you're going to be weeding for 7 years. For every year of seeding, there's 7 years of weeding. So I realized that the oxalis was the worst, and since my beds were so extensive, that I instead of just taking out every weed in one area, I went through and got all the oxalis first. And that's what I'm doing on this larger property here. The same strategy. I have 4 acres here. I chose the worst weed, which happened to be knapweed, and I go through and I get every one of those out. And again, knowing the life cycle is the key. And so from there, how do we remove weeds? Well, the best way is by hand. Okay, hand pulling, using trowels. I have a few different tools that I use. Actually, the one that I use the most is a hori hori. It's a Japanese. It's a nice thin. It's got a razor sharp edge on this side, a little knife blade. But this is another tool that I use, and of course, just a hand trowel is fine. You're going to need something to kneel on. Knee pads are kind of a little bit uncomfortable, so I prefer this. And then, of course, you're going to need your bucket. So the main thing is bucket, some kind of a trowel, and a kneeling pad. This is what I would do to go out there. So you're going to be removing weeds by hand. Also, I forgot to mention the gloves. The gloves are super important because these gloves, instead of thick leather work gloves, these are very tough, but they give me the tactile ability to pinch the roots out. Okay, I need to grab them and pull them out by the root. And what we'll do is, I'll usually lift them, I'll loosen the soil, lift it a little bit, and then pull it. So I'm using, in conjunction with the trowel, I'm using a gloved hand. Okay, so methods of hand removing the weeds. So hoeing, cultivating, if they're small, you might be able to just kill them by moving your hands around, your gloved hands around. But anyway, you're going to get rid of the weeds. You can mow them down. You can use a weed eater. Again, if you're doing that, you're not killing them. You're just cutting off the flowering top, and the weed will continue to grow. Okay, so to finish, I have a few things to mention. I've given you some tools and some ideas of how to remove these weeds, but what I didn't tell you was Roundup would be the last option. And in some instances you may use that, but you have to really know what you're doing, and I would trust a professional instead of some young kid gardening boy coming around. So, and a friend wanted me to mention, and another thing that I truly believe in is that weed fabric does not work. It's a pain, because especially if you try to come in and plant later, if you hand control the weeds. So what I would do is, if I had my little garden plot at the home, I would remove every single weed by hand with my trowel and my gloved fingers, and then put bark down, put a mulch down, and you want to mulch about 2 inches thick at least, and that's going to keep the weeds. You might have one come through, really easy to pull at that point, but you'll be done with the weeds. Once you get that bark down, you're good. So I'm going to step over here. My assistant's going to follow me here, and I'm going to show you. Let's zoom in on this plant here. So this plant is a knapweed. This is what I'm taking out on 4 acres here. here, and it just happens to be right there, is a Russian thistle, tumbleweed. I'm going to put my hands underneath it. You can see that, and I can go like that and pull it out. Look at that. You have to get it by the root. If it breaks off, a lot of times they grow. So that's the Russian thistle, classic tumbleweed. I'm going to show you how I take this one out. This is a life cycle of this plant. The knapweed is a biennial. That means it grows a rosette the first year, and the second year it'll spike up. It's in the thistle family, but you have to get the roots. So I'm going to go right down next to it and listen to this. I didn't hear it, but of course you don't want to throw a bunch of dirt in your bin, but there it is. And a lot of times this root, I've taken some out that are actually the second year, and the root will be 1 foot. It's hard wood like a carrot. So that's it for the most part. Develop a strategy, know the life cycle of your plants. Hand pulling, if they're small enough you can cultivate them. If they're little tiny you can cultivate them and remove them. Once they get to about this big, hand pulling, and it's just diligence every day if you have a lot, and that's about it. So if you have any questions you can write me. Be sure to like it, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much.